looking for a meal. They'll start to walk around the Galapagos tortoises, and the tortoises will notice that. And from there, they'll actually expose and rise up. They'll expose their limbs and necks to kind of show more of their exposed skin. And the birds will actually go in the nooks and crannies and dig out ectoparasites like ticks or take dead skin off of them, and that's their meal. But the Galapagos tortoise gets the benefit of being able to have this cleanup crew take care of it.
Welcome to Animals, Nature, and You. I'm your host, Rick Schwartz, and as always, and as you know, I'm glad you're here. Today's episode is pretty cool because although this is a species I know a lot about, I've been fortunate enough to see them in their native habitat. I've worked around zookeepers who care for them and gotten to know these animals, but it's not my specialty. And yes, I could put together a 10-minute Tuesday that would probably go closer to 15 minutes to share all sorts of cool facts, but I would rather have a conversation with someone who knows a lot more about them and does more work with them than I have ever done. So with that, I want to introduce to you today's guest. Christian Flores is a wildlife educator who uses social media as a tool to introduce concepts of biology, zoology, and environmental consciousness to the general public. He highlights many underrepresented species such as snakes, invertebrates, cassowaries, and he does this more to help shift people's fear, hopefully, into fascination. Christian is well known for his Crikey It's Christian social media, whether it's Instagram or YouTube, but professionally, he is a zoologist, having had extensive experience as an animal care specialist for birds, mammals, and reptiles. He uses his knowledge and his specialties to focus on their overall well-being, habitat design, nutrition, enrichment, and breeding programs in helping threatened wildlife for the future. So with that, we're going to jump right into this. I appreciate you taking the time to be here, Christian. I can't thank you enough for carving out a little bit of your schedule to be on Animals, Nature, and You.
Yeah, Rick, I appreciate the invitation to be able to talk about some awesome reptiles today.
Yeah, and I did mention in the intro, we kind of went through your bio. You've got a diverse background. You've worked with birds, mammals, and reptiles, but the conversation we started initially in direct messages was about Galapagos tortoises, and that's really where I want to focus today's topic. You've got experience with them. You've got knowledge of them. I've had the pleasure of going to the Galapagos Islands and doing some filming there, but I don't have really deep knowledge of them, more of a great appreciation. So I'm glad you're here. I want to talk about these incredible reptiles. I think to start off with, I guess, what are Galapagos tortoises? Or actually, no, let's take it even a further step back a little bit, because in the common non-animal care world, people interchange turtle and tortoise. So let's start there. What's the difference between a turtle and a tortoise?
Yeah, it's a great question. And so as far as turtles and tortoises, to get to the basics, turtles is the bigger circle, tortoises is the smaller circle in that. So all tortoises are a type of turtle. They are chelonians, that's the whole group. But from there, that includes your sea turtles, your terrapins, all the different names you'll hear. But tortoises are a circle in that. Those are land-dwelling species with very column, elephant-looking feet. They do have nails, but they're more blunt by comparison, versus your actual turtles are going to be living in rivers and streams. They have true claw nails, I try to emphasize with people. They have webbed hands or flippers. So lifestyle is a part of it as well to kind of differentiate the two.
Okay, and the other one that I hear a lot, that I, even as a wildlife educator, can a turtle or tortoise get out of its shell?
Often in the old cartoons, you see them slip out of their shell to be this sort of odd looking body. And the answer is no, they can't slip out of them. It is actually attached to both their vertebrae and their ribs. So it is definitely stuck in place. But yeah, so those old cartoons that you see of them slipping out is not actually reality. They cannot get out of their shells.
Right. They would pass away, unfortunately. Okay, so now that we have the foundation, the basics are out of the way, let's jump into Galapagos tortoises. And for anyone listening who doesn't know, the Galapagos archipelago or group of islands, they're volcanic islands off the coast of Ecuador. They're part of Ecuador properly when it comes to government boundaries, but they are far enough out there. It's not like you can stand on the beach in Ecuador and see them. It is a decent flight, not as far as Hawaii. If you're flying from California to Hawaii, it's not quite that far, but it is a decent flight. So it's not like it's just a short little step away. And you look at the wildlife we have on mainland South America now in Ecuador, and you look at the Galapagos Islands and the archipelago, you have there on the islands a collision of a wide variety of ocean currents, cold and warm. You have sort of this way stop on the equator, near the equator, for a lot of different flying wildlife and aquatic wildlife. And then you've got these giant tortoises. And I've always been fascinated by the many different theories and ideas of how these massive 300 to 500 pound sized tortoises that you just shared with us, tortoises are land dwelling. It's not like they're going to go for a quick swim. How do scientists explain this giant tortoise being on the Galapagos Islands?
So, as far as evolutionary history, I'm going to use the word millions for a few different years. But again, in the grand scheme of things of our entire planet, this is a grain of sand of time. This is a blink. I think when we oftentimes look at the Galapagos Islands in nature documentaries, we see the volcanic rocks and these ancient tortoises that look like dinosaurs. People automatically think, wow, these islands must have been here for hundreds of millions of years since the dinosaurs themselves, when it's actually not the case. Geologists believe that the islands really erupted roughly about 5 million years ago, which again sounds like a long time, but the grand scheme of things is a grain of sand. From there, Galapagos tortoises got there about 2 million years ago. To give a sense of perspective on that time frame, our earliest human ancestors in Africa were starting to walk upright and use hand tools. So that's at least a reference to use as far as what else is going on the planet. Now, how they got there is an interesting case because there have been different theories as to why, whether they floated, rafted, any amount of cases. But from what we understand, these animals likely were on South America, this sort of starting species that would have then floated their way through ocean currents to get to the islands today. And another topic on that is okay, Galapagos tortoises are huge. We're talking about a 500-pound animal. That's the weight of a motorcycle. It's amazingly large. But the question then is, did this tortoise start small, get to the islands where all these food was, lack of competition, and get bigger, or were they already big to begin with? And the most recent theory, and I currently believe it, is that they were already mostly big to begin with and made their way because in order to be so large and be in the ocean, you have to be able to have the fat stores, have the ability to stave yourself off on such a journey like that. A smaller tortoise is going to have a rough time being able to do that just with less fat and less stores to do so. And so this larger-ish tortoise would have floated their way to the Galapagos Islands, landed there, and then from there, eating a lot of the vegetation, was able to grow into the giants that we know today.
There's so many things to unpack there. And of course, it is all scientific theory, which is different than just I have a theory. There's a lot of science that goes into finding ourselves in that position. And always with science, it is we are applying all we know right now. And if we learn something more later, then of course that theory changes and evolves as we learn more. That's called growth and whatnot there.
Yeah, exactly.
Yeah, space for learning. Well, we can figure that, right? But it's fascinating in an interesting we'll get to it eventually when we talk more about them and how their numbers decline, but they can live a very long time without food, although on the islands they are surrounded with food because, as you mentioned, there's no natural competition for that. But they would last a very long time. There's documents in whaling records of whalers purposely knowing to stop by there and basically grocery shop. They would grab a bunch of these tortoises and keep them below deck, and they would live a very long time without food and offering the sailors then fresh food. So the idea that they potentially could have floated from mainland to these islands isn't too terribly far-fetched. But let's talk about a little bit. I mean, there are theories out there. It was a storm, a hurricane, a tornado, something that could have washed them off where they were and put them into the ocean. They just landed haphazardly on these islands because clearly they're not like, hey, I'm going to go for a swim. That's not their thing. But tortoises, they have the lungs, they have air sacs, they have air pockets in the shells that are under the legs. So potentially they could have floated that distance on the current without food, made land, and now we're 2 million years ago. We have some sort of tortoise species now landing on these islands. I want to talk a little bit about that size. You had mentioned it's possible they might have been smaller and grew to the 300, 500-pound animals we know today, or they could have been that size. With that size range, does it serve a purpose, do we know, to be that large? Or is it perhaps just like you mentioned, the advantage of not having competition so you can be slow and large and not worry about it?
Yeah, when it comes to reptiles in general, they are definitely products of their environments, just as any animal is. And so, with reptiles in particular, being able to have resources to heat, food, all the natural bare necessities of life, when reptiles have abundant resources, they can flourish really well. And that does come with getting to larger sizes, whether it's reticulated python, the green anacondas, having access to food in South America or Asia, respectively, or Komodo dragons with different hoofed mammal prey. Same thing with reptiles, as far as the tortoises go, having abundant food and warmth in order for them to grow is the recipe of this. How do you bake the cake that is a giant tortoise? Those are some of the ingredients for sure. And there actually is a recent discovery through paleontologists that there was a giant tortoise on mainland South America. It's called Chilonoidus pucara, and it is related to our Galapagos tortoises in the genus Chilonoidus. So there was a giant tortoise already on mainland South America and Argentina around that time. So again, for them already being large-ish isn't too hard to say.
Right, right. Yeah, that makes complete sense. And of course, as we've seen with other species that we know historically, maybe not at the exact same time, but we had ground sloths at one time, which were as big as bison almost. We had lions that were the size of cars or bigger. We had the mammoths and all these other large species that eventually went away for one reason or another on mainland, where the tortoises, then the Galapagos Islands and archipelago, may have been protected from whatever caused those other large animals to find it better to either, well, not find it better, but either went extinct for whatever reason, or the only the smaller ones survived for some reason, for whatever challenges happened. So it's kind of cool to think about that there could have been these incredibly large tortoises floating across the ocean, and then the islands basically protected them from whatever might have happened, on the mainland for these larger species. I do want to kind of keep this thread going of this large animal. I've had the pleasure of when I was at the San Diego Zoo, I spent some time with the Galapagos keepers and animal care staff, spent time taking media and doing interviews in the habitat itself. I was always amazed that these 300 to 500 pound animals that are like walking boulders, essentially, could sneak up on you if you weren't paying attention.
Yeah,
Not
for
that they
sure.
were fast, but they're so quiet. And movies and television have us with this belief that these large lumbering animals, make the ground shake, which is great for a story. But I've been around elephants, and you can barely hear them walk because they're soft-footed pads or soft feet. Goodness, listen to me, professional speaker. They're soft pads on their feet, along with camels too, being large mammals, but with a very soft step. So what's been your experience spending time around Galapagos tortoises? What are their personalities for these big, large, lumbering animals that can also be kind of sneaky and inquisitive?
I mean, I would say my experience working with Galapagos tortoises was something I'll truly never forget. I have had the pleasure to work with both giant tortoise species on our planet today, the Galapagos tortoise and another species called the Aldabra tortoise. And Galapagos being our focus, I've worked with around 10 individuals of varying sizes, one that was 7 years old, around 13 years old, and up into their 20s of individuals. And like I said, they're a privilege. They really are. Being able to work with this very ancient feeling species, and also again, we joke about turtles being slow. I think when we talk about animals in nature and it's the connection that we have with wildlife. And I think being able to work with the Galapagos and turtles and tortoises in general really allowed me to sort of take the moment to slow things down, quite literally, and just be, rather than being so quick to rush into the next thing I had to do in my day or whatever else was going on. And one of them I affectionately nicknamed Littlefoot. She was a young female who was incredibly sweet. And as we talk about personalities, she could brighten my day no matter what. Being able to work with her, she would always have this habit that I would walk into the habitat, and I don't want to anthropomorphize the animals, but I would walk into the habitat and she would always turn her little head, look at me, then get up, rise, and then start walking her way towards me. Could it be that she thinks that people as a whole mean something positive, or it's exactly me? I can't fully say, but that was at least her. And you start to feel that sort of, miniature bond. There were also giant tortoises I worked with that, hey, you have food? I like food only, and I only want food. And that's okay. There's nothing wrong with that. But I think when guests would come and they would ask really serious questions like, hey, like, do reptiles feel emotions? Do reptiles like things? Do reptiles like you, and I think, it stems from a lack of understanding of these animals. And I think just taking that time to really observe, work with them, watch them, and as the turtle and tortoises do, act a little bit slower in life, allows you to really gain the observational skills and the love for what they are.
Yeah, absolutely, absolutely. And I think it's fair to say, at least from my experience, and of course, so that puts it more in anecdotal than scientific, but in the sense that in the time that I got to spend with a group of tortoises at the San Diego Zoo and the team there were definitely individual personalities in the tortoises and definitely preferences. They had preferences where they wanted to be in the habitat, where they had preferences of which tortoises they wanted to spend time with versus not. And so therefore, I think it's fair to say that when Littlefoot turned and looked at you, there was probably some recognition of who you were more than just a food source. But yes, we'll never know for sure because we don't want to, we can't get inside their head. But either way, I do want to jump into also then how there have been times here in the United States and other countries where zoos have bred Galapagos tortoises. And again, when I was able to do some filming there in the Galapagos Islands, we went to the park there, the preserve where they're doing a lot of work and they're doing breeding. So again, adult tortoises, anywhere from 300 to 500 pounds. How big is the egg?
For the egg, it is still it's a large baby. So if you think about a chicken's egg, we're used to seeing that every day now in our
Sure.
routine lives. But a Galapagos tortoise egg is roughly the size of a tennis ball. So if you compare a tennis ball to a chicken's egg, that is still a pretty big difference. It's a dense egg. I haven't had the pleasure to breed Galapagos tortoises yet, but I had the experience to see eggs and such. And you feel like, wow, this is a living thing could be in this egg. And when they hatch, they're roughly, dark gray, black in color. They're a very beautiful animal. But if you have never seen an adult before and you see a baby, you cannot imagine that this little sprout will end up becoming 500 pounds of shell and bone and everything there. It's astounding for sure.
Yeah, it is impressive the amount of growth that they go through, and it's funny in the sense that they're strict vegetarians. They're just chomping their way through through plants and fiber and fruit, whatever they can find. And it's just amazing that their body has the ability to convert all of that to the energy to live, but also the amount of energy it takes to grow to that size. Now, of course, it's not a rapid thing. You have something like a cat or a dog usually reaches full size in a year to year and a half. Galapagos tortoise is much longer, of course, but it's still very impressive. With that, too, then, I know going from the hatching and the egg side, let's go to the other end of the life cycle for them. There's a lot of different stories out there about how long they can live. What's been your experience when you've done your research and looked into this? What do we know for sure versus what do we assume for longevity of a Galapagos tortoise?
Well, you hear plenty of stories. There are many of, these animals living to 200, 500, anecdotal ideas of animals, changing hands. Because again, when you think about it, it's hard to really start from an egg and raise this animal. If you were a singular person, if you were to do this yourself, you're definitely going to transition ownership. And I also mention this because of people who want to own turtles and tortoises as pets, which is not a problem. However, this is an animal you may grandfather to your relatives. And so
Yes, yes.
focusing on Galapagos tortoises and the giants in general, we have Galapagos tortoises, one example being an animal named Harriet, who was actually at the Australia Zoo, and she lived to around 175 years. That is quite long.
Yeah.
While the oldest Aldabra tortoise, the other giant, we have one alive today, and his name is Jonathan. Jonathan is around 193 years old.
Ooh.
And that is quite old. And so I say around and roughly, and that's just due to because, again, transitioning animals when they started as an egg, or maybe an animal was from the wild originally brought into human care, to exactly date an animal is a little bit tricky. Some people think that you can actually count the rings on a turtle or tortoise's shell, and that means years. But in actuality, it means growth. I'll debunk that myth now because, again, people think it's like a tree where you count from there. But the rings mean growth, and that can be influenced by humidity, resources, all the things we talked about earlier right now about how they develop. And so you can't go off the rings. So there's no full tell exactly. And so that's why we at least understand that Harry and Jonathan are some older examples. But again, some people live to be 75, some people live to be 95. There is a chance they could definitely well be reaching 200 or a little bit beyond that.
Right, right. Yeah. Genetics, health, nutrition, lifestyle, all that plays a factor with animals just like it does with humans. And I will say, I'll add my 2 cents to what you just said about, changing hands. Also, I know for some of the older tortoises at the San Diego Zoo and other zoos, documentation wasn't always accurate way back in the day. You go back 100 years ago, and the documentation that we do today of exactly what time and day they hatched or were born, how much they consumed, how much fecal matter came out the other end as they're growing to make sure they stay healthy. We document all of that nowadays. Back in the day, you're lucky to find how much food did they eat this month, or what do you feed them even, because it was all transferred from mouth to ear, and not necessarily written down. So you do get maybe the second keeper or the second person that's been on this animal, like, well, I was told they were 10 when I got them. I've worked with them for 50 years, and so the accuracy is questionable, but still there is enough information usually in data that they can go back, oh yeah, this animal has been at the zoo for at least 160 years. And we assume it was an adult when it arrived. So it means it's around 10 to 15, so it is a bit of gray area sometimes, but sometimes there is more accuracy, and it's just either way. I don't care if it's 130 or 170, 190. That's impressive for Jonathan and Harriet, everybody. That's awesome.
Yeah.
And then it makes you think too about on the island before, or even just around Darwin's time, and what it must have been like to approach that island, to get on that island and see these tortoises and just the sheer size of them. One thing that I've always thought was fun to share with people, and I want you to help us dive into this, is the shell shape. Classically, within the world of Galapagos tortoises, we know there's the dome shape, which is like what we consider most tortoises look like. But there's also then the saddleback shape, which has that upside down U, which allows the neck to come up further. And you had mentioned before we started recording, those can be found on the same island sometimes or on different islands. And so my question to you then is, why is that? Why, if they came from 2 million years ago, one particular species, as far as our theory goes, from the mainland, why do we see two very distinct different kinds of shells in the Galapagos tortoise?
Well, I think us talking about how they're a product of their environment really speaks to this specific topic, because I feel when it comes, if you look at all tortoises on the planet, not just the Chilonitis, the ones of South America, but beyond that, almost it's more the default setting for them to be domed in a way, because the majority of species do look quite domed. And so in these areas where there are more lush vegetation, more grasses, low-hanging shrubs, that's when you're seeing more of those domed individuals. However, in the drier habitats of the islands, or select dry islands specifically that have these tall Opuntia cactus trees or just higher hanging vegetation, the evolution is not a choice. However, they had to adapt and evolve somehow. And so the shell shape did change over time, where instead of being so domed, it actually started to peak up at the top of the shell and allow more clearance for those necks to go up. There's a current closest relative to the Galapagos tortoise. It's called the Chaco tortoise, Chilonitis chilensis. And this species, again, not the direct descendant of the Galapagos tortoise, is close enough genetically, and they also have a dome shell. So there is enough reason to believe that, just like most other tortoises, dome is the default setting. But through these environmental circumstances, led to them adapting and becoming the saddleback that we know. And listeners, if you were to Google this and look at a dome versus saddleback, it's night and day. You can definitely see the difference between the two.
Well, yeah, absolutely. And it's fascinating to me too, in the sense that you think about how this works over millions of years. And just like you had said about that time, I think you said about 5 million years ago initially, you had talked about how that was really when our human ancestors were starting to walk upright in Africa. Is that right? Where you'd said that, right?
The 2 million mark, yeah.
Or the 2 million mark. Okay. So you think about how much change the human form went through in that 2 million years to then be where we are today, right? So you look at the Galapagos tortoise and go, well, how did that shell change so dramatically? Well, humans changed quite a bit in that time period. So as we think about, and for those who aren't aware of, in a scientific view of evolution, it's the adaptations come from usually slight genetic modifications that prove to be beneficial for life. And so therefore, a slight change in the shell proved this animal can eat more, it's going to live longer, be able to breed, be healthier, versus one that didn't have that change happen. That genetics get passed on over a series of generations. Another genetic modifier comes along that's could be looked at as a modifier or a defect, depending upon how it works for the individual, that then helps move that along. And now today in our modern time, such dramatic differences between the two. I will say too, having the pleasure of being there many years ago, that lush environment where the domed tortoises live, it is lush. It's like a rainforest almost. And it's so amazing to me that on the other side of the island can be that drier cactus, desolate looking area. And these tortoises have figured out a way to survive in that space. One thing that is a fun behavior that I had seen repeatedly in the zoo environment and got to see then in the Galapagos Islands was the finch response. And it makes sense when you think about it on the island, but in the zoo environment, and I know you've cared for these species, where you can go in and you can kind of give them like little scratches or rubs either on the leg or on the neck or chin. And they stand up incredibly tall and then hold still for a very long period of time as if they're really loving this rub down. But share with us, what exactly is the finch response and why do they do it?
So the finch response, or sometimes just called finching, is a behavior that they have evolved in the Galapagos Islands where finches, small birds, Darwin's finches, the very famous title of his theory of evolution, is that these finches have co-evolved with the Galapagos tortoises, and that what the finches will do is looking for a meal. They'll start to walk around the Galapagos tortoises, and the tortoises will notice that. And from there, they'll actually expose and rise up. They'll expose their limbs and necks to kind of show more of their exposed skin. And the birds will actually go in the nooks and crannies and dig out ectoparasites like ticks or take dead skin off of them. And that's their meal. But the Galapagos tortoise gets the benefit of being able to have this cleanup crew take care of it. Now, going into human care, there's no real ticks on them anymore because even the ticks on the Galapagos Islands have evolved specifically to target Galapagos tortoises or other wildlife. But in human care settings, they're a lot more clean by comparison. They're taken care of so well. But instead of having birds, they have us. So we are the birds. We're able to go and scratch them, and it still fulfills that itch. It fulfills that feeling that they desire to be taken care of, essentially. And so we are the birds in human care today that are able to rub their necks and their limbs, and it still fulfills a benefit for them that they feel.
Yeah, just to share with the audience listening or watching, when they do this, they get very tall. They really stretch their legs out as high as they can, dome or saddleback, and they'll stretch their neck out as far as they can. And it's so fun that even after you're done scratching them, they'll still sit there for a little bit. And some people interpret that as soliciting for more attention. No, I'm not done yet. Please keep doing it. But the other side of that is that if you think about how this behavior evolved, the idea of staying very still for as long as possible is important to not startle the birds away, and you get your maximum cleanliness and getting rid of those parasites. So it makes sense. But it's always fun too when they're finally done. It's almost like someone letting the air out of the tires. Just gotta they slowly go down to their regular stance and move about their day. So it's always fun to see that. I do encourage anybody who has the opportunity to go to a zoo that has Galapagos tortoises. We had mentioned earlier, you were talking about taking care of them. Slow down, take your time to observe. It really is. There's such fascinating animals and so fun to sit and watch. And if you go there and they happen to be sleeping, circle back around and check out the habitat again later in the day, or plan your trip to go there earlier when they might be more active at feeding time. Any of that. They're just so fascinating. That being said, there is a lot of work being done for conservation, whether it's zoos working with the Galapagos Islands and the national park there, and the conservancy, or just in general. Walk us through real quick, why are they facing so many challenges? I know some of the subspecies or species, whichever you want to call it, have gone extinct. There are some that the numbers are very low. They're doing a lot of breeding over there, trying to save these individuals. What has happened? They seem to have this safe haven for millions of years, and now all of a sudden they're facing possible endangerment.
So as far as the story of the Galapagos tortoise, more of a conservation narrative, is that, yeah, during the time of whaling in Charles Darwin's time, whalers would go and find these islands and then from there store these Galapagos tortoises on board. Unfortunately, not in the most humane means, and that would also mean losing their lives for the consumption of sailors. But a lot of animals were taken because of that. And so populations would be dropping. Again, these are animals that, for the most part, Galapagos tortoises need to reach about 30 years to reach sexual maturity. And so from there, you're plucking away these adult animals for food, 500 pounds worth of potential meat or whatever it may be. You're taking all these adult individuals that would be breeding and succeeding as the population for increasing. And as time has progressed, the different types of Galapagos horses have unfortunately gone down in numbers. We then have introduced goats and pigs and other invasive species that have either outcompeted them for eating their food, the natural grasses and shrubs that would be there for the tortoises, or the pigs themselves will actually excavate nests and eat the eggs themselves. And so they're have really faced some challenges on multiple ends. And so that is why some of them are unfortunately, depending on the island, are threatened, critically endangered, what have you. But one conservation organization that's doing an amazing job is what's called the Galapagos Conservancy. And so what they're doing is not only working with local people to protect native areas, but also breed some of these very endangered, very threatened Galapagos tortoises in order to keep their populations going for the future, which is a major undertaking in order to preserve again this creature that we have such a history with and we think about as a de facto almost mascot of evolution.
Yeah, that's I do like that. I've never heard that before. That's funny, a mascot of evolution, but it truly is. And almost everybody has some sort of knowledge of the Galapagos tortoise. And so to think that they could eventually go away is quite terrifying. And I love the work that the Conservancy is doing. I know you've done a lot of work also. Is there, I guess, let me put it this way. If there's anything you could tell someone who's like, hey, I want to do something for turtles and tortoises, what can I do? What would you share with that individual?
Yeah, so talking more broadly about chelonians or turtles and tortoises, as a group, there's around 350 different species, and a large portion of them are unfortunately endangered, threatened, similar circumstances. I had the pleasure to also work with a species called the plowshare tortoise, which is widely considered one of the most critically endangered species of tortoise on the planet. However, for any person at home who wants to make a difference or do something about that, your consumption makes a big difference. When it comes to maybe you're traveling abroad in Thailand or a different part of the world, and you see a trinket shop where they're selling combs made out of tortoise shell or shark jaws or whatever it may be, that came from a living thing. And so refraining from the purchase of some of these trinkets and items is a great way to not contribute to those markets and some of those practices. The other thing is your palm oil. So when it comes to cosmetics or cookies or candy that you consume, a lot of those products are made with palm oil, which is a plant that is grown in monoculture in many parts of the world and oftentimes involves clearing a lot of natural space in order to grow it. Now, there is sustainable palm oil, which is what I'm recommending. You can look up ways to have organizations that are using sustainable palm oil that is not clearing all that space and is providing corridors for wildlife. That's a major thing people can do. The other thing is also just the use of fertilizers and pesticides that eventually can run off, and all things lead one direction. That could be a lot of our waterways. And so those would be three main ways that any person, no matter what circumstance you're in, you can do in your day to day to help turtles and tortoises in your own backyard or across the planet.
Yeah, and that's a great point. I appreciate you bringing that up because some people don't live where they can go outside and see a turtle or a tortoise. And like, well, they don't naturally live here, so what can I possibly do? But you're right. Being a conscious consumer, being a conscious traveler in the sense of what are you purchasing and supporting when you go to these other places? What are you purchasing in your own grocery store that might support things like the monoculture of unsustainable palm oil? And then I didn't even think about it, but yeah, you're right. Exactly. It's also what do we put out there as far as fertilizers and pesticides because everybody lives downstream. There are plenty of plenty of turtles and amphibians and other species that are all connected to turtles and tortoises one way or another that rely on fresh, clean water just like we do. So those are all great points. Thank you so much, Christian. Is there anything else we haven't touched on you want to make sure everyone hears about before we wrap up?
Yeah, I mean, again, I in this hustle and bustle world, we always feel like we need to rush to the next thing and always think about the future and et cetera, et cetera. I think we all can learn a little bit of a chapter from the turtles and tortoises themselves to slow things down and enjoy life for what it is for the time being. As far as if people want to follow things that I do and my conservation work, you can follow me at Rick Christian on my social medias, Instagram and YouTube. I also have an upcoming book that I'm working on. It's called Artemis Paleozoo, which is a fictional storybook for younger minds or the inner child in yourself that is focused on the idea of what if we could bring animals from the past back, whether it's a long-necked dinosaur or Tyrannosaurus Rex. My role as a zoological consultant was sort of digging into the idea of how do you do animal welfare or give the best care to a 50-foot, 100-foot long dinosaur or a carnivorous meat eater that is 65 million years old. And so for anyone wondering, you can look at Artemis Paleozoo coming up on Project Paleozoo, the social media, and it'll give you updates or from my own social media of when the book will finally come out. I think many of our zookeepers that listen to this and people who love wildlife will definitely get a kick out of it.
That's awesome. And of course, anybody who has kids who love dinosaurs, my goodness, those kids' heads. That's awesome. I love that. That's such a cool concept. Thank you for sharing that. And of course, as always, everyone listening or watching, all of those links and everything that Christian mentioned will be down in the show notes, so you can click on those links and check that stuff out. Christian, thank you so much for taking the time today to be on Animals, Nature, and You and talk about Galapagos tortoises. I really appreciate it.
Yeah, thank you again, Rick. It was a great time.
And of course, thank you, dear listeners. I appreciate you joining me on this curious odyssey that we call Animals, Nature, and You. As always, if there's anything that Christian and I spoke about during this interview or in this conversation, really, all those links will be down below in the show notes, as I mentioned, whether it's his social media or anything else, the Galapagos information, all of that. There's also a link I'll add. TurtleConservancy.org is a great hub for turtle and tortoise conservation. So if you have young ones or even yourself want to learn more, not just about the Galapagos tortoises, but just in general about this fascinating animal, or animals, I should say, and how you might be able to help, what you can do to get involved. Christian mentioned some great things there, but maybe you want to take it a step further. Maybe you want to find a way to donate and support for your own local turtle or tortoise group, in which case Google might be your friend because I don't know where you live. But either way, I'm excited that maybe you're excited too about taking care of our shelled little friends out in the wild. And before we wrap this up, I do want to remind you, if you haven't already, please hit subscribe or follow. We have so many more great interviews lined up for the rest of this year. I am so excited. And probably next week, 10-Minute Tuesdays coming back too. I don't want you to miss any of those. 10-Minute Tuesdays, if you don't know, I've been doing solo episodes every Tuesday for about 10 minutes, hitting on a particular topic that might be currently of interest in the nature animal world, or perhaps just the fun facts, sort of serious things about animals. Either way, those are coming back soon. And again, every Thursday, we have new interviews with awesome people doing awesome things. And last but not least, if you are interested, Animals, Nature, and You has its own Instagram handle, just Animals, Nature, and You. Again, link down below. And if you want to get a hold of me directly without any use of social media, there's also a link called Send Fan Mail, where you can just send me a message via that link. I'll get it, and eventually I will get back to you, I promise. And if you ask a lot of good questions, I might use some of those questions for a 10-Minute Tuesday. You never know. All right, let's wrap this up. Have a good one, everybody.